You know, there is this really disturbing, repetitive pattern that echoes across centuries, cultures, and political systems. It's a phenomenon so consistent and, frankly, so unsettling that it kind of forces us to look deeply into the mirror of our own human nature. Again and again, massive groups of people willingly place an enormous amount of trust in dangerous, manipulative individuals. And sometimes, the very people who appear the strongest end up becoming the most destructive. Now, we aren't just talking about the fact that these figures exist. I mean, humans have always sought power, right? That part isn't exactly surprising. What we are going to unpack in this explainer today is the hidden architecture of the minds that actually elevate them.
So that brings us to the central mystery of all this. Why do millions of intelligent, highly educated individuals choose to follow them? Why do ordinary folks defend them, even when the warning signs are literally flashing right in front of their eyes? At first glance, it almost seems impossible. Most of us like to sit back and imagine we would never, ever fall for manipulation. We assume we'd stay completely rational while everyone else gets swept away. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Manipulative leaders rarely succeed because their followers are foolish. They succeed because they intimately understand human psychology. They're tapping into something deeply, deeply ingrained in all of us.
Take a look at this quote. The psychological mechanisms that allowed powerful leaders to gain influence hundreds of years ago still exist inside modern humans today. It's chilling, but it's true. The technology we use every day has changed. Our societies have completely modernized. Even the language we speak has evolved. But beneath the surface of all our smartphones and towering cities, our human mind remains remarkably and dangerously familiar. We are basically navigating this hyper-connected, nuclear-armed modern world using the exact same brain hardware that was designed to help us survive the Stone Age.
Let's dive right into Section 1, our ancient survival instincts. To really understand the modern follower, we kind of have to travel back thousands of years, to a time before laws, institutions, or social safety nets. Today, we live in a world of immense modern complexity. We deal with ambiguous threats, intricate global economies, and just an endless flood of information. But our brains? They evolved for something entirely different. They evolved to prioritize an ancient need for certainty. Thousands of years ago, your survival depended absolutely on belonging to a group. Isolation literally meant death. In an environment packed with immediate physical danger, you needed decisive leadership. You needed someone to coordinate action and project absolute confidence when everyone else was terrified. Put simply, our ancestors survived because they were deeply drawn to certainty. Belonging, protection, cooperation, resources, just having a confident voice in the dark. These weren't preferences, they were biological requirements for staying alive. And the wild thing is, even today, this ancient instinct remains highly active. Whenever society feels unstable, that ancient alarm bell rings in our heads, and the emotional exhaustion of uncertainty kicks in. We instinctively crave a confident voice. We want someone who appears to know exactly what has to happen next, because biologically speaking, ambiguity feels like a literal threat to our survival.
Which brings us to Section 2, the illusion of certainty.
Picture this. You're in a room filled with panic. Nobody knows what to do. Then, suddenly, one individual speaks up with absolute unwavering certainty. The room instantly calms down. Why does that happen? Well, it's because the human brain constantly conflates confidence with competence. Someone can be highly skilled but cautious, while someone else can be completely wrong but sound absolutely certain. The tragic irony here is that the person who knows the least is often the loudest, mostly because they aren't burdened by the nuance of actual expertise. To an anxious brain, their blind certainty feels like salvation. We start trusting individuals based on how confidently they speak rather than how accurately they think. At the end of the day, certainty reduces anxiety. It is a total illusion, sure, but it's a deeply comforting one. It acts almost like a psychological pain pillar for an anxious crowd. Modern influencers, political figures, media personalities, they all project certainty to build trust rapidly. And honestly, it doesn't even matter if they don't have the facts or the evidence to back up their claims. By simply providing an illusion of stability, they are feeding a primal, desperate human need.
Okay, let's move into Section 3, how fear creates followers.
If confidence attracts our attention, well, fear absolutely weaponizes it. Under normal conditions, our rational brain will step in and ask, is this leader actually correct? We evaluate evidence, we tolerate a bit of complexity, but inject some economic panic or social unrest into the mix, and our logic completely regresses. People feel vulnerable. The brain basically stops caring about objective reality and shifts to a much more primal question. Can this leader make me feel safe?
In moments of deep fear, simple answers and emotional comfort become vastly more important to us than complicated, nuanced truths.
Let's explore Section 4, the psychology of tribal thinking.
We are social creatures through and through. We crave belonging and identity. And because we crave it so badly, manipulative leaders use a highly mechanical, honestly chilling strategy to exploit us. Step 1, define a shared enemy. Step 2, identify the outsiders. Step 3, establish conflict. By forging this intense us versus them mentality, the leader artificially skyrockets the cohesion of the group. When you perceive a shared enemy, independent analysis just shuts down entirely. Any criticism of the leader starts to feel like a betrayal of the whole tribe. Your loyalty shifts away from your core principles and attaches directly to the personality leading the charge.
It is a really tragic paradox when you think about it. The most destructive tribal conflicts are rarely driven by a genuine love of violence or hatred. Actually, they're driven by a desperate, vulnerable need to simply belong. Belonging always feels good, especially when people feel totally lost. That vulnerability, that deeply human craving to feel connected and protected, that is exactly what is being weaponized against us.
This takes us to Section 5, the architecture of influence. We love to tell ourselves a comforting little myth that we are rational beings persuaded by logic, facts, and reason. But in the architecture of influence, emotion always arrives first. It's a closed loop. Step 1 is to trigger an emotion, because stories and symbols will always hit harder than dry statistics. Step 2, that emotion then shapes the follower's perception of reality. Step 3, that warped perception reinforces absolute loyalty. Logic only arrives after the fact to justify the emotion. By the time a follower actually recognizes the process, they feel like these implanted conclusions are entirely their own independent thoughts.
And this happens with terrifying speed. A single, emotionally charged narrative bypasses our rational filters entirely and infects a crowd in seconds. Fear spreads like a virus, aggressively seeking out those vulnerabilities we all carry around inside us.
Anger spreads, too. It provides a highly contagious, intoxicating, yet entirely false sense of power and righteous action to people who otherwise feel completely powerless and ignored by the modern world. And yes, even hope spreads. This emotional contagion sweeps up literally everyone. Intelligence does not immunize you. Having a PhD doesn't magically erase your ancient emotional hardware. Highly educated individuals still experience fear. They still desire belonging, and they absolutely still crave certainty. Under the right conditions, anyone can be compromised.
Let's slow down a bit for Section 6, the leader in the crowd.
It is deeply comforting to believe that the manipulator is the sole problem here, that they somehow cast this dark spell over a naive public, conjuring tribal instincts out of thin air. But the truth is, they don't create the fear. The fear is entirely pre-existing. It's lying dormant within us, just waiting for a spark. The leader is simply exploiting what was already there all along.
As this states, in many ways, they become mirrors, reflecting emotional needs back to society. They aren't puppet masters creating emotions out of nothing. They simply reflect our own darkest emotional needs, our hidden divisions, and our desperate hopes right back at us. They are a manifestation of the crowd's internal psychological state.
What this ultimately means is that the leader, alone, is powerless. It's the crowd that provides the followers, the attention, the trust, and the belief. Without the psychological architecture of the crowd holding them up, the entire illusion instantly collapses. They are completely dependent on us willingly offering up our minds to them. So the greater danger isn't necessarily the existence of manipulative figures. The greater danger may be humanity's absolute unwillingness to recognize the psychological vulnerabilities inside ourselves that make their manipulation possible in the first place. The real challenge of modern society isn't just learning how to spot a bad leader. The much deeper, much harder challenge is learning to recognize those ancient, vulnerable parts of ourselves that so desperately want to follow them.
Those ancient instincts for certainty and belonging, they aren't going anywhere. Manipulative figures will always emerge. They are a constant throughout human history. The only question that really remains is, will humanity ever fully understand why it keeps giving them power?